Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're setting off on a massive cinematic sprint through time. Literally, we're going to trace a continuous relay race of human history, starting all the way back in the dusty plains of ancient Mesopotamia and running right up to the brink of the modern world. We'll be looking closely at the chronological progression of our ancestors, zeroing in on the monumental rise and fall of major empires, the birth of global religions, the incredible age of exploration, and the explosive industrial revolution. It's a ton of ground to cover, but we have exactly the right roadmap to get us there. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our 6-part chronological roadmap. We'll kick things off with the first civilizations, move into classical empires, witness the dawn of global religions, map out trade and medieval empires, set sail in the age of exploration, and finally land in the era of revolutions and industry.
So starting us off, Section 1, the birth of the first civilizations.
Our journey kicks off in ancient Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians actually invented writing and, believe it or not, divided our days into hours and minutes. Soon after, figures like Sargon built the very first empires purely for pride and power. Following his lead, the world saw an absolute explosion of structured societies. By 2500 BCE, organized cities emerged in the Indus River Valley, and by 1700 BCE, Hammurabi was carving his famous laws into rock. But what's really fascinating here is how fragile these interconnected Bronze Age civilizations were. Because around 1200 BCE, right as the Iron Age began, these grand diverse empires mysteriously started falling apart at the exact same time. Let's move along and see how this builds, because while those early empires were rising and falling, a group called the Phoenicians, along with the Canaanites, were busy sailing and trading. Over 3,500 years ago, they realized that instead of drawing entire pictures for words, they could just use simple symbols for sounds. Step 1. Their word for ox was elup, which started with the ah sound. Step 2. Their word for house was bet, starting with ba. You put them together, and you get the alphabet. Incredibly, we even have proof of this brilliant ancient invention preserved on an everyday item, of all things an ancient lice comb.
Moving right along to Section 2, Classical Empires and New Ideas.
As civilization stabilized, a massive boom in philosophy swept the globe. You have Siddhartha Gautama seeking an escape from suffering in India, Confucius in China, and Socrates in Greece. But as new ideas flourished, so did the size of conquering armies. Alexander the Great swept through the known world, and after his death, his generals essentially carved up the globe. This led to massive, expanding empires frequently clashing with fierce, local religious identities. Take this rather humorous, though intense, historical exchange involving a Greek king named Antiochus. He basically demanded everyone worship him as Zeus. The Jewish people flat out refused, leading to severe tensions and ultimately pushing the Jews to revolt and establish their own nation once again. Now, while the Parthians and Romans expanded their vast borders in the west and Chinese dynasties built walls in the east, their domestic technologies looked very, very different. To put it in perspective, the expanding Chinese empire actually invented paper and were the first to use toilet paper. Meanwhile, the mighty Romans were famously handling their bathroom business by wiping with sponges on sticks. It's a pretty stark and kind of funny reminder of the remarkably diverse ways human innovation developed across the globe.
Okay, Section 3, the rise of global religions.
We transition here into a dramatic era of spiritual shift. A man named Jesus was crucified by the Roman state. Yet just days later, his followers claimed he was alive, and figures like Paul traveled relentlessly, spreading the new faith of Christianity. The Romans did not take kindly to this, launching severe persecutions and famously feeding believers to lions. But ironically, these brutal tactics completely backfired. The sheer conviction of the martyrs made Christianity vastly more popular. It eventually grew so massive that Emperor Constantine legalized it and unified their beliefs. Religion completely reshaped global borders. While Buddhism had spread through Asia and Christianity conquered the Roman Empire, an even bigger change was brewing in the 7th century. Arab clans had been fighting each other for hundreds of years. That all changed when a merchant named Muhammad stated he received revelations from the God of Abraham. He united those eternally warring Arab clans into Islam. No longer allowed to fight each other, they directed their energies outward, quickly conquering an empire larger than any the world had ever seen up to that point. On to Section 4, Expanding Trade and Medieval Empires. Shifting into the Middle Ages, the globe was highly active. We're talking Austronesians sailing to Hawaii and Vikings pillaging the north. Meanwhile, the old Roman power structures were crumbling. As Huns pushed into Europe, they forced Germanic tribes right into the borders of the Western Roman Empire. And this brilliantly illustrates how tribes like the Vandals steadily dismantled the empire from the inside out. They quite literally vandalized Rome, taking what they pleased, like a souvenir gold necklace, and eventually settling down to conquer and rule the territories themselves. But this era of medieval expansion also brought unprecedented tragedy. Over in Asia, Genghis Khan united the Mongols and conquered twice as much land as Alexander the Great. As their massive empire expanded, connecting the East and West more tightly than ever before, they inadvertently facilitated the rapid spread of disease. The Black Death swept across these trade routes, wiping out a staggering 1/3 of Europe's entire population. Let that sink in, a full third. Which brings us to Section 5, the Age of Global Exploration. The demographic collapse of the Black Death eventually gave way to the Renaissance, pushing European powers to seek new trade routes and basically sail blindly west into the unknown. Ultimately, two massive sea powers essentially divided the globe in half just to avoid a fight. Spain claimed the Americas, violently disrupting massive native civilizations like the Aztecs and Incas. Meanwhile, Portugal sailed around Africa to build a highly lucrative Asian spice trading empire. This unbridled expansion also kickstarted a horrific cycle. Portuguese traders began buying enslaved people in Africa, trading them for food, and trading the food for European goods, brutally laying the groundwork for the transatlantic slave trade. Back in Europe, Johannes Gutenberg's newly invented printing press was fracturing society. A German priest named Martin Luther used it to protest the Catholic Church, sparking the Protestant Reformation. Over in England, King Henry VIII broke from the church simply because he wanted a divorce. These furious religious debates completely shattered European unity, but they directly fueled the rise of new colonial sea powers in northwestern Europe. The Dutch broke free from Spain to capture the spice trade, and English pirates began dominating the seas, eventually setting their sights on North America. Finally, Section 6, Revolutions and the Industrial Age. As European powers colonized the globe, they were constantly clashing. A massive debt-fueled colonial argument between France and Britain triggered a violent domino effect of global uprisings. To pay off war debts, Britain taxed the Americans. The Americans revolted. France helped America but went into massive debt themselves, so they taxed the French people. The French revolted. In all that chaos, Napoleon seized power and conquered Europe. Watching this unfold, Simon Bolivar led a wave of successful revolutions in Latin America. So the crucial point is, Britain, wanting to avoid a political revolution of their own, opted for an industrial one instead. They harnessed steam power, making manufacturing faster and cheaper, which pushed them to build a second, even larger global empire just to sell their new goods. Now, this Western push for open global trade had absolutely devastating consequences abroad. The British East India Company took control of India and began forcefully selling opium into China. When China pushed back, the British Navy attacked. Amidst this intense volatility in Asia and influenced by spreading Christian missionary ideas, a man in China claimed he was the brother of Jesus Christ and led the Taiping Rebellion. This internal conflict resulted in a staggering death toll of up to 30 million people. While Western Europe focused on overseas colonies, Russia was busy expanding across land. Descended from Vikings in Kiev who conquered themselves back from the Mongols, Russia's Tsars pushed their borders immensely over the centuries. They grew so massively large that their expeditions sailed all the way south, with Russians actually claiming they discovered Antarctica just days before the British, which, is a bit of a stretch when the continent was already fully inhabited by penguins. By the late 19th century, newly united nations like Italy and Germany wanted colonies too, sparking the scramble for Africa. European powers justified this using 19th century scientific theories, claiming they were the most fit to rule. However, in reality, the African continent was already home to incredibly rich, complex civilizations. We're talking the ancient empires of Egypt and Kush in the north, to Mali and Songhai in the west, to the massive builders of Great Zimbabwe in the south. Yet, the Europeans ignored this rich history, drew arbitrary lines, and colonized the continent anyway. This frantic land grab leaves us with a really provocative question. Britain became the biggest empire in history. France, Germany, Italy, and others all aggressively expanded their territories. With the invention of crazy new technologies like telegraphs, battleships, and airplanes, the pace of human history reached a fever pitch. But what happens when these heavily armed empires realize there is simply nowhere left on Earth to expand? The answer to that question seamlessly set the volatile stage for the devastating world wars of the 20th century.